Beautiful. Well, hi everyone. I'm Janet B. I've recovered from compulsive eating and bulimia and happy to be with y'all on a Monday night where we are going to finish up the chapter We Agnostics, which we started 2 weeks ago. So just a quick summary for those who weren't able to be with us 2 weeks ago or who didn't want to be with us 2 weeks ago. This really starts the bottom of page 43 where it says once more. So that before they start working on step 2, they want to hammer something home to us. They say the alcoholic, the compulsive eater, at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink, the first compulsive bite. No mental defense. Can't keep the memory green, can't think our way out of it. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. So there goes the idea that the group can be a higher power. His defense must come from a higher power, capital H, capital P. Then we turn the page, and in We Agnostics, we saw that they define what an addict is. If when you honestly want to quit, you can't, and if you have little control over the amount you take when you're trying, you're probably a compulsive eater. And they say if that's the case, you need a spiritual experience. So we went back and what is a spiritual experience? Well, page 25 talks about it. And I love how they say it. They say the great fact is just this and nothing less. They are telling us to settle for nothing less, that God has entered our hearts and lives in a way which is miraculous and has commenced to do for us what we could never do for ourselves. So this chapter is for people who say, well, that sounds great, but I don't believe in God. And they're saying half of the people who started AA didn't believe in God, but they were willing to believe in God. Willing. Okay, so that's all we need, a willingness to believe in God. And it's just kind of interesting. We find that when we're willing to believe and we say a prayer, something along the lines of, God, I don't know if you exist, but if you do exist and you do care, please help me. And then we set about doing things that God, if he did exist, would want. Like he would want us to stop stealing. He would want us to stop telling lies. He would want us to start helping other people. So we start living lives of integrity and self-sacrifice and trying to connect with God. And they go through a bunch of prejudices, 6 or 7 different prejudices that we can have about God. And then they define what our problem is. They say, page 45, it says, lack of power. That is our dilemma. So that's our problem, lack of power. Didn't have the power to do what I wanted to do. And then it says, okay, so we had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. How are we to find this power? And they say, that's the purpose of this book. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. Well, if this power is going to solve my problem, this power has to be able to think, has to be pretty smart, has to be powerful. And to me, most important, if this power is going to solve my problem, this power must care about me. Otherwise, he can just be sitting up in the heavenlies watching Netflix all day long. But he's not. He's not. He cared about me who did like these insane things, like take a razor and slash myself and pretend I'd been mugged or raped to get attention, stealing people's food, stealing money. He cared about me, and he was going to restore me to sanity. So it has different prejudices that we work through. They're really clear that we don't have to believe in another person's conception of God. You can be any religion or no religion at all. And we left off, I think, on page 51, where it says, many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives. And then they talk about, this is on the whole of page 51, how, people are fettered, like shackled by fixed ideas. And they go back and they compare it to, years past when in the science realm, people's minds were fettered by fixed ideas. Remember, they all thought like the world was flat and Columbus was crazy and Galileo was almost put to death for what he believed. They had set views about science. And then the big book says, aren't some of us just as close-minded in the spiritual realm as people used to be in the science realm? Like we can read a newspaper that, man went to the moon and we believe it. But when someone says there's a loving God who cares about us, then we're like, yeah, no, it can't be. And I think we have to ask ourselves why? Why are we so willing to think that there is no God? In page 52, they say, okay, let's put that aside. Let's talk now about how your life is. And they talk about the unmanageabilities. Are you having trouble with personal relationships? Are you unable to control your emotions? Are you filled with misery and depression? Do you feel useless, full of fear, unhappy? Okay, isn't it important to solve these problems? And anyone, any addict worth their salt is going to say, well, yes, I would like to have these problems solved. And bottom of 52, they say, well, we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe. And then we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas didn't work, but the God idea did. So what happens? We see there's, 103 people, and we see a whole bunch of them. Some we may not know, but some we know. And we see week after week, year after year, and they're living sane, happy, useful lives, not binging, not being tornadoes around their families, able to hold jobs. And they hear where we used to be. And when we say it happened by a simple reliance upon God. What does it mean to have a reliance? Like I always believed in God from like my earliest memory. Well, big deal. I wasn't relying on him. I was treating him like a servant. God, do what I want, then leave me alone. But reliance. So that means I do what I think God wants me to do. And then I just trust him with the results. Like a small example I have now, my son has an interview with the sheriff's department Wednesday. It's like a pretty hard job to get. And he has an interview. And I'm like, okay, this could be great. I'm like, Daniel, do you want me to prep you? Like this is what I do at work. I can do stuff like this. Do you want me to help you? No, no, I got it. And so my reliance on God is to just say, I've offered. He says no. And I have to let this be his path. I just trust God with the results. And I pray, God, if it's your will, let him find favor in the interviewer's eyes. And maybe it is God's will, but my son doesn't put in the effort. Well, I believe God is like this spiritual GPS. And if Daniel makes a mistake, God can reroute him. And no matter what happens with Daniel, I can be okay. My happiness does not depend on the success of my children. My happiness depends on, am I relying on God and doing his will as best as possible? Maybe a kind of wimpy example, but that's one that's active in my life now on how I'm working on relying on God. And it says, when we saw others rely on God, okay, we had to stop doubting the power of God. And then they talk about the Wright brothers, the guys who like the first ones to fly. I actually, now that I'm in North Carolina, instead of going to the Jersey Shore for vacation, we go to the Outer Banks. And you know what's on the Outer Banks? Kitty Hawk, which is where the Wright brothers first had their flight and this whole museum there. So here they're talking about the Wright brothers, and they say their almost childish faith that they could build a machine which would fly was the mainspring of their accomplishment. Without that, nothing could have happened. And I think, okay, it wasn't their knowledge of like mathematics and physics and laws about gravity that was the mainspring of their accomplishment. And they say, no, faith. Without that, nothing could have happened. I mean, that's pretty extreme. Like if they didn't have faith, it wouldn't have happened. And then I think about our second step. It says, came to believe that a power greater than ourself could restore us to sanity. That's a really weird step. The other steps, we admit, we do an inventory, we make amends. But this is about believing. Why on earth is that a step? Why do I have to believe something? If I have pneumonia, and my husband sticks penicillin in my water without me knowing, I'm going to get better. I don't have to believe that penicillin will restore me to health. Why do I have to believe that a power greater than myself, God, who I turn my life over to in step 3, can restore me to sanity? Because faith is the currency in the spiritual world. So imagine like a Martian looking down on me one day, watching me go to the gas station and handing a guy this little piece of plastic that says American Express on it, and he fills my tank of gas. And then he watches me go to the grocery and, peel off some green and white pieces of paper, hand them to the clerk, and then I get a bag of groceries. Well, he wouldn't understand that money is the currency in the physical world. But I can't hand God my gold card and say, restore me to sanity. That's not how it works. The currency in the spiritual world is faith. So coming to believe that God can restore me to sanity actually starts the process of God restoring me to sanity. I picture it like this. This is not in the big book. This is just Janet's imagination. I picture God up there, not watching Netflix, but watching us and hearing a prayer one day, right? Like, okay, God, I'm going to decide to trust you. I'm willing to believe that you can restore me to sanity. So then he says, Gabriel, Michael, you angels over there, get yourself a squad. Our next soul renovation job is going to be for that person. Faith is the currency in the spiritual world, but not just belief. Okay. It starts with belief, but it has to be followed with action. If there was a God, what would he not want me to do? He'd probably not want me to cheat on my taxes or cheat on my husband. What would he want me to do? He'd probably want me to take a phone call when I don't feel like it. He'd probably want me to be useful. Okay. Faith is the currency in the spiritual world. And if we don't believe it, we could put it to the test. God, I'm not sure, but for 30 days, I'm going to try connect with you every morning, and I'm going to do everything I think you want me to. Again, someone asked Mother Teresa, what do you do to increase your spiritual life? She said, spend an hour a day with God and don't do anything you know is wrong. We could do we can do an experiment and try that for 30 days. So page 53, it says, when we became alcoholics, compulsive eaters, crushed by a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? Interesting. We have a choice. I can choose, it's like I was once in England, but like years and years ago. I choose to believe the information I have that King Charles is the king in England now. Now I don't see him on the throne, but I choose to believe the news that I've heard. Okay? We can choose to believe that there is a God who loves us. We can choose that. And it says either God is everything or else he is nothing. Okay, don't be a smart aleck like I used to be and say, well, is God this pen? You said God is everything. I think what they mean is either we make God everything, or it's as if we make nothing of him. We surrender everything to him, or else it's as if we surrender nothing to him. And they say, okay, let's think a little more about it. And bottom of page 53, top of page 54, it says, don't we really have faith? I mean, if we think there is no God, then we have faith in our own thinking, that I think whatever I have in my brain must be truth, must be gospel truth. Well, I guess if I don't believe in God, there's no gospel truth, but you know what I mean, that it's whatever I think must be fact. And they say, okay, so I've been worshiping the God of reason. In page 54, they say, we are worshipers. We are all hardwired to worship. It says, had we not variously worshiped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves. Just side note, notice what's missing from this list. It doesn't say, have we not worshiped alcohol? Because that is not what happened. We are not people who worshiped food. We worshiped ourselves. And then as a result, the illness of compulsive eating could come tumbling in, and we have no marching in, and we have no defense. So these are our idols, right? What do we worship? Other people, sentiment, things, money, ourselves. And it says, and sometimes we worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower. Those things can point us to God, but they're not God. And they say, we've all loved, we've all worshiped something. It says, it was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith or love or worship. So since we're hardwired to worship, I would just say, if you're going to do that 30-day experiment of, I'm going to try and spend time with God every morning and not do anything I think is wrong, I would throw worship in there. We can all spend time worshiping. I start my prayers every morning, or part of my prayers. I sing a worship song to God. I take this crappy voice that he gave me and give it right back to him with a worship song. I start with worship. I don't start with my gimme list. I start with praising him. And so page 55, they talk about, okay, what about people who prove that man could never fly? Well, then obviously the rights proved them wrong. And they say, but we've seen a different kind of flight, page 55, a spiritual liberation from this world, people who rose above their problems. They said God made these things possible, and we only smiled. We had seen spiritual release, but liked to tell ourselves it wasn't true. Okay, why would we, if we're active in addiction and we see 103 people who've had spiritual release, why would we tell ourselves it's not true? Because sometimes we are just stubborn. And if you're anything like me, sometimes you want to be right more than you want to find the truth. Or I would say how I used to be. Sometimes we just want to be right. And then it says, we're fooling ourselves. My favorite line in the big book. For deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. That is so beautiful. So that says when God created us, he gave us like one heart, two lungs, two kidneys, a stomach, a spleen, and somewhere in all that mess, he planted the fundamental idea of himself, that he loves us so much. He planted the idea of himself in us, right? And then it says it may be obscured, blocked, like cataracts can block us from seeing in the physical world. Well, what can block us from knowing about God in the spiritual world? Can be obscure. Calamity, pomp, worship of other things. Calamity, like bad things that have happened to me or those I love. It would just be so easy to say, why did you let this person die? Why did you let this person get sick? Right now I have reactive Epstein-Barr virus, and I hadn't had a flare up in quite a while. And starting about a month ago, I just started getting flare-ups a lot. I have one right now. And right before this meeting, I called someone and it's like, this really stinks. I have to go and give this talk when I'm all achy, calamity. But so it's like, oh, God, why? And that's like, no, 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 Janet, no self-pity. Bad things happen. I don't sit there and say, oh God, why did this person over in Arkansas who I've never met get struck with Epstein-Barr virus and feel sick? It's only when bad things happen to me or my family or, like that. Not always. I sit there and I'm like, God, why do you allow human trafficking? And I don't know the answer to that. And I'll never know this side of heaven. But every day when I say my prayers, I pray for the victims of human trafficking and I pray for the traffickers that they have a change of heart. I don't let calamity get in the way of my belief in a loving God. By pomp, well, that's like me thinking that I'm so great, that I'm entitled to everything, that I'm entitled to perfect health. which I'm not, that I'm entitled to have my kids listen to me and do everything that I know is best for them. I'm not. I'm entitled to nothing. God removed my food obsession. He deserves my worship just for that, even if he never does anything else. And worship of other things. What are our idols? What are we putting ahead of God? What are we bowing down to? Is it our reputation? Is it our jobs? Is it a person who we're too afraid to have dislike us? Is it our children's success? I had one of my big idols was not my kids' success, but what my kids thought of me. I was so afraid that they wouldn't love me when they got older that I vacillated between being too strict and too lenient. Um, and I really made an idol out of that. But I overcame it. I overcame it with help and with prayer. So all of these things can be overcome. So, okay, so it says all these things can obscure our view of God, spiritual cataracts. It says, but in some form or other, the idea of God is there for faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human life are facts as old as man himself. What good is faith in a power without a miraculous demonstration? If I came to you and said, wow, I really believe that there is a God who loves me while I'm shoveling food down my throat. There's a God who loves me and he removed my food obsession and he gave me a great sense of purpose and he does it to everyone who does this work. This work is just connecting with him and helping some of his other kids and cleaning up the damage we've done in the past. That's really it. It's so simple. And it says, we saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup. And they say, we can only clear the ground a bit. Our testimony, here's the job of our testimony. So whenever we speak at a meeting, this should be our job to help people sweep away prejudice, enable you to think honestly, and encourages you to search diligently. Then you can join us. And then they close off the chapter by telling one of my favorite stories. It's the whole story is our Southern friend in the back of the book. I think it's a great story and I'm often encouraging people to read it. So this is kind of the Reader's Digest version, but we'll cheat a little and we'll go into the story itself. So top of page 56, our friend was a minister's son. So right away you think someone who's raised in church is going to be religious. And he's like, no, he was rebellious. So we see a little pride there. And then what happened in his life? Business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide in his immediate family. So that's calamity, right? I mean, say that's pretty bad. These things embittered and depressed him. So he had resentments. And he ended up in a mental hospital. So page 56, one night when confined in a hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. And then the minister's son bitterly cried out, if there is a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me, right? I mean, talk about having a servant God or a genie in the bottle God. It says, but later he said, is it possible all the religious people I've known are wrong? Okay, what happened to that? If there is a God, he hasn't done anything for me between that and his humility. So we're going to go to the full story on page 214. So he's talking to one of his friends and the friend says to him, you're not hopeless. There's men on the streets of New York today who were worse than you and they don't drink anymore. Then he asked me if I believe in a power greater than myself. I told him I believe in electricity and other forces of nature, but as for God, if there is one, he hasn't done anything for me, okay? Nothing for me. So then the guy asks him, are you willing to right all the wrongs you've ever done, no matter how wrong you thought the other person was? Are you willing to be honest with yourself about yourself and tell someone all about yourself? And are you willing to think of other people and their needs instead of yourself in order to get rid of the drink problem. And this is what he said, I'll do anything. A great saying I heard from Herb K out in California, willingness opens the door to grace. That was his experience, and that was my experience. The moment I took a hard sponsor who I was kind of afraid of, okay, very afraid of, and I just said, I'll do anything you tell me. And I went out to God and I said, I'm starting over fresh with you, whatever you want. That was it. That was the end of my obsession. So here's the minister's son. He says, I'll do anything. And what does the other patient say to him? Then all your troubles are over. So the minister's son ponders it. He goes to bed. The thought comes, can all the worthwhile people I've known be wrong about God? It's like a step two. He's willing to believe. He's open-minded. So, and then he hears this voice, who are you to say there is no God? So what does he do? He goes back to the other patient's room and says, I have to ask you a question. How does prayer fit into this thing? And the man says, well, you've probably tried praying like I have. And this is how I had always prayed before. When you've been in a jam, you said, God, please do this or that. And if it turned out your way, that was the last of it. And if it didn't, you said, there isn't any God, or he hasn't done anything for me. Is that right? I think we should all ask ourselves that question, right? Yes, says the minister's son. That isn't the way, the other patient replied. The thing I do is I say, God, here I am and here are all my troubles. I've made a mess of things and can't do anything about it. You take me and all my troubles and do anything you want with me. So again, I would challenge all of us here, if we're going to do that experiment for 30 days, that we're going to spend time with God, and we're going to not do anything we know is wrong and try and be helpful. We start our God time with worship, and then we say this beautiful prayer. God, here I am and here are all my troubles. I've made a mess of things and can't do anything about it. You take me and all my troubles and do anything you want with me. And so the other patient said, does that answer your question? And the minister's son says, yes, it does. And he goes back to bed and he says, like, this doesn't make sense. And this is what he says. He says, suddenly I feel a wave of utter hopelessness sweep over me. I am in the bottom of hell. And there, a tremendous hope is born. It might be true. Bottom of page 215. I tumble out of bed onto my knees, right? He's praying to a God who he only might believe in, might be true. He's not sure. I tumble out of bed onto my knees. I know not what I say, but slowly a great peace comes to me. I feel lifted up. I believe in God. I crawl back into bed and sleep like a child. So he starts his prayer saying, it might be true, maybe. And God shows himself to him. We have to seek God, but it's not like God is hiding in a hard place. God wants to be found. He wants us to seek him, and he wants to be found. So turning back to We Agnostics, bottom of page 56, it describes what happened. Like, how did he start saying it might be true and end up saying, I believe? It says, he tumbled out of bed to his knees. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed by a conviction of the presence of God. See, God revealed himself to him. It poured over and through him with the certainty and majesty of a great tide of flood. The barriers he had built through the years were swept away. What a good God this is. Like, I build the barriers, but God sweeps them away. Isn't that what the seventh step is? God sweeping away the barriers we've built. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. What good is a God who doesn't have power and just has love? Well, that might be nice, but it wouldn't help me. And a God who just had power but didn't love me, that would be a God I'd be afraid of. But this is a God of infinite power and infinite love. And he says, for the first time, but not the last, he lived in conscious companionship with his creator. and his alcohol problem was removed. Page 57, it says, God had restored his sanity. And then they say, what is this but a miracle of healing? Remember, in one of the forwards, it says this book is a wholesale miracle, right? It's like a miracle available to everyone. We don't have to pay retail prices. Wholesale miracle. And it says, but its elements are simple. Okay, that's really crazy. They're telling me the elements of a miracle, like the recipe for a miracle, is simple. Okay, and here it is. Circumstances made him willing to believe. Circumstances, step one, right? He knew he was powerless. He was willing to believe, step two. He humbly offered himself to his maker, his creator. Then he knew. After he offered himself, after he prayed, after he surrendered his life, then he knew. And it says, even so has God restored us all to our right minds. Page in chapter 5, it says, once the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. God has restored us all 100% to our right minds. To this man, the revelation is sudden. Some of us, it takes more time, but he has come to all. God comes to 100% of the people who honestly seek him. And that chapter just ends with the promise. When we draw near to him, he discloses himself to us. Okay, ended early, we can stop here, or I could do a little more on step 2 that's in the next chapter. I think I'm going to do that. So if we go into how it works, on page 60, it talks about it's like their last words of step 2. Says our description of the alcoholic or the compulsive eater, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were compulsive eaters and could not manage our own lives. Well, that's usually easy, right? If not, we'd all be like watching Netflix or something. Compulsive eater, can't manage my own life, easy. B, do you believe that probably no human power could relieve your compulsive eating? That means no doctor, no group, nothing human. And then yes, that's usually easy for people. But C is where people get tripped up. And I will say, I think it's important not to move ahead in the steps until we can pass the C of the ABCs. We have to believe that God could relieve our compulsive eating and would if he were sought. So let's break that down. And so you can ask yourself this. Do you believe that God can restore other people to sanity? And you look and you see 103 other people here, and a lot of them have been. So it's like, well, yes, I believe God could restore other people to sanity. Okay, next. Do you believe God could restore you to sanity if he wanted to? He may not want to, but could he if he wanted to? Anyone have a problem with that? If you do, you can raise your hand and we'll address it. Okay, so we can agree that God has restored other people to sanity, and he could restore each one of us to sanity personally if he wanted to, but he may not want to. And then here's the tricky part, believing that God will restore me to sanity if I seek him. And if I asked how many people believe that God will restore you personally to sanity, how many of you don't believe that? I think some hands go up because that part's a little hard. So I thought about it once, and I thought that there's 5 reasons why people think God won't restore them personally to sanity. One is I've done some really bad things in my life. One is I just don't deserve it. I'm not worthy. The other is I caused this illness. Maybe, someone with cancer, he would help, but it's my fault that I have this illness. The fourth reason is I've tried so many times before and it hasn't worked. And the fifth reason is I'm not willing to do the work to seek him. Okay, if you're giving me the fifth reason, I will say to you, you are right in believing that God won't restore you to sanity because it says we have to seek him. But let's take the other four. The person who says, well, I've done some really bad things. Then to that person, I would say, you're in great company. So did the founders of AA. That's why they put an eighth and a ninth step in there, because we've all done bad things and we have a chance to make appropriate amends. Now, the second one is the one that I think trips up a lot of people. It's, I'm just not worthy. And to that person, I say, you really have two options. You could spend like, I don't know, $20,000 on therapy for a therapist to try to convince you that you're worthy, and it may or may not work. I don't know. Or you could accept, yes, I'm not worthy of God restoring me to sanity, but worthiness isn't a requirement. I for sure wasn't worthy of being restored to sanity. But if you look through the first 164 pages of this big book, you will see that worthiness is never a requirement, only willingness. And the kind of ironic thing that happens is when we admit, Lord, I'm not worthy, but please help me anyway, and he does, we kind of start feeling good about ourselves. That, you know what? God loves me. God cares about me. I must be okay. So it's not that we have to get better and get worthy and go to God. We go to God admitting we're not worthy, and we end up feeling not so much worthy as just grateful and okay with that. I'm okay with not being worthy of what God's done for me. I'm okay with that. But I feel good about myself. The third thing is that, well, I caused this. And, we can debate it. Some people say, well, we're born with it, or, selfishness brought it on. So let's just say we did cause it. Let's just say that's true. And then let's say I'm walking across the street carrying my cell phone, looking at my phone, and because I'm not looking at traffic, I get hit by a truck and my legs get broken. And when the ambulance comes to take me to the hospital, who of us would ever say, don't take me to the hospital to fix my broken legs? It's my fault. I caused this problems. I'm going to get a couple pieces of cardboard and make some splints and set my broken legs myself. We would never do that. But when it comes to the spiritual realm, it's like we get all noble, like, I don't want to bother God. It's okay, we can bother God. It's okay. The fourth reason, and this is, again, another legit one, is I've tried it so many times before and it hasn't worked. And I remember having someone call me once and she said, I've tried this for years and it hasn't worked. I'm like, were you rigorously honest all those years when you were like doing the program? And she said, no. I'm like, then you weren't doing the program. You were doing something else. You were writing inventories and making phone calls, but you were not doing this program. If I try to take a picture with my cell phone 100 times for 10 years, pushing the on off button, I'm not going to get pictures. But if I really want to take pictures, all I have to do is find someone who knows how to take pictures with her cell phone and say, will you help me? And then just do what she says. And suddenly, instantly, I'll be able to take pictures. Okay, so came to believe that God could restore us to sanity and that he will restore us to sanity if we seek him. And if someone has trouble with that, please raise your hand in the Q&A, because that's just so important, that we believe that. And it says, once we're convinced of that, we're at step 3, being convinced that there is a God, that he cares about us, and that he can and will restore us to sanity. And that's all I got.